Hello everyone, and this is a currently unreleased but on the way game by the name of Sinslayers, and it has a very particular feel about it that reminds me of something like Darkest Dungeon-ish. It's kind of, it seems to be going for a similar vibe to that sort of concept, and there have been other games as well that have been doing that since its release, mostly because it was amazing and a lot of people wanted to try their hand at something like that. Although this is not a clone or anything like that, it is just something that reminds me of Darkest Dungeon and other games like that, kind of mixed with a very classic turn-based RPG from ages past. Which is probably why I was initially interested in it in the first place, because that sort of combination is just fun for me, and I wanted to give it a shot. So, as I mentioned, Sinslayers is not currently out. It's not in early access or anything like that. It is. It has a Kickstarter campaign, actually, that's going on, and I'll just, as usual, link you below in the description to the actual Steam page of this, and if you're interested, you can find links to their Kickstarter and their like regular updates and things there if you want to know more. And there have been very regular updates, because, of course, this game is still technically in development, even though it's not early access or anything. It's not done, basically. So everything that I say in this video is, of course, subject to change eventually, and there is obviously still a lot of work to be done, and a lot of work being done. And in fact, the developers themselves have been very willing to change things, mix things up, just improve things in general based on the feedback that they've been getting, and, of course, the goals that they are reaching. So, ostensibly, Sinslayers is a turn-based RPG with a importance on a sort of exploration layer that you're seeing here that involves sort of, not turn-based or real-time, just tile-based, we'll call it, exploration of an overworld area, or a dungeon area, and a focus on composing a specific team of people with various abilities that will sort of, hopefully work together and allow you to progress through the area. So the name may suggest that, of course, you are slaying the sins, as in the 7 deadly sins in this case. And each world of the map is actually themed around one of them. As you can see here in the background, we're going through the Forest of Gluttony right now. Why is Gluttony in a forest? I don't know, but they are. And the game is very heavily based around the idea of risk-reward, which is something that I really, really enjoy in my RPGs, especially sort of very difficult ones that often have a very good balance of both of those things, where, if you think you have the skill or you think you're well-equipped enough to take on a particularly difficult task, then you will be justly rewarded for it and go into the more less optional areas even better equipped than you would before. This is common in a lot of games that are in the sort of hardcore RPG scene, because just the basic idea of, you are sort of strong, but in order to get really strong, you need to take some risks and be willing to sort of go out of your comfort zone in terms of how strong your characters are and overcome more tough areas and enemies and the like to get better rewards. And this game has a lot of that. And one of the biggest systems that is actually surrounding the whole risk-reward, I guess, economy, almost, you could call it, in this game, is the actual sin system. So, in every area you saw during the sort of dungeon exploration layer there was a meter in the middle top of the screen, and that represents the actual level of sin that your characters have. And there are two main ways in each area that actually to affect this meter. So one is there is actually a curse related to the sin whose area you're in that will increase it in some way by doing something. So for instance, if you're in the Forest of Gluttony, you will increase your sin by eating food. If any of your characters eat food to heal, then you'll get some sin because of that. Or if you're in, say, the Graveyard of Sloth, every time you rest at an area to restore your character's health, fountains are generally what you rest at. They're sort of like almost checkpoint-ish locations that are very useful to find during the game itself. If you rest like that, you will build up quite a bit of sin because you're being slothful, is the idea. I like the theming of the sort of, 7 deadly sins versus actions that your characters can do to sort of fit into that category and thereby incur their wrath, essentially. It's pretty neat. And there are also just random encounters, things that you'll find in the world, like, say, a crypt door that could be opened, or a bunch of sacks laying in the corner somewhere, and messing with these, because they're sort of morally gray things to do, like, seeing if a body has something on it, just looting something, like a friendly body and the like. All these things up your sin by doing them, but, of course, give you chances to find items or get quest items and stuff like that. So it's very much risk-reward in the sense that the whole overarching system in the game is this whole sin thing, and the more opportunities you give your characters to advance by, finding rarer loot on other containers and just doing these sinful things, the harder the game will get for you, because as your sin levels up, you'll get less rewards from battles and enemies will get stronger, and eventually you'll want to do things like praying at altars that you can find, or ignoring outright all of those optional encounters that I was talking about, and those things will reduce your sin. So you kind of have to balance what you think your characters can handle versus how much of an extra chance for better loot and things you want to get. It's very much like the torch system in Darkest Dungeon, where, the higher torchlight made it so where you could surprise enemies, you had a better chance for crits, and enemies weren't quite as powerful, but your loot wasn't as good either, and the lower the light you went to, the stronger everything got, but the better the stuff you could find. It's very much a similar risk-reward based system, and I enjoy that kind of thing a lot. I mean, you're seeing several of the actions in the background right now with things like opened coffins. If you want to, desecrate those tombs, you might find some really good stuff, but it will definitely increase your sin to do so, or you can just choose to walk away, decrease your sin as a result, but you never know what you could have found. It's a fun mechanic, and I do, like I said, very much like the sort of theming, that every area has its own curse based on the actual sin lord that rules it, and something thematic involving that character, that sin, is actually what will make things more difficult for you, like eating food or resting too much. The combat itself is a turn-based affair, as you can see, with your 3 characters on one side and enemies on the other. Usually 3 versus 3 is the max. And every character is very specifically themed in what they can actually do, as you would probably expect from a game like this. Right now, there are only a few sort of classes in the game because they're not all done yet, but eventually there is a plan to have about 10 of them. Each character will start with a couple of abilities, a sort of basic attack that they can do every turn, or a basic thing they can do every turn. For instance, the priest down there has a heal rather than an attack, of course. And they will also have this rage meter that fills up for every time they use their basic ability. Generally, it gives them 1 point in it. And sometimes there are other things that can help you get more of it. For instance, the priest has a passive that makes it to where when she gets hit, it gives everyone else extra rage to sort of, help them end the battle sooner, basically, since she's kind of fragile. And this rage can be spent on other abilities, and a character will start with one of these. For instance, the sword wielder there has an ability that it does less damage than his normal strike, but has a 50% chance to strike again. So it doesn't have as much guaranteed damage, but it has a 50% chance to do a lot more, which is pretty cool. And again, you're talking about sort of risk-reward and things there, and transitioning that idea into combat is also pretty important in a game like this, because you don't want the combat to feel too detached. You want the same sorts of mechanics and ideas to actually be a part of the combat as well as the exploration, or else they'll feel like two separate things that are a little bit too far apart. And as you, kill enemies, you'll get various crafting materials. There is a crafting system in the game. You can make stuff either on your own or go back to the hub area, the safe hub, which is a church. And there is a blacksmith there that can craft even more stuff. You can get various recipes to be able to make new things yourself, and of course the various other items, we'll say, because there's a lot of stuff that it's not just equipment. There's, food and potions and these crystals that you can get. All of those can be made at the blacksmith as well. Accessories, books, necklaces, And the crafting system actually has a kind of interesting idea. For one, the character progression currently is actually done via making these crystals out of money, and the crystals are used to unlock the new tiers of your character abilities. They basically have like a tree of abilities they go through, and each tier takes an extra crystal of the sort of next tier up to unlock, and oftentimes the characters will have 2 or 3 abilities to choose from, and you can just in real time go back to their ability page and set which one you think is more useful for the time, so you can easily swap between different ones, which I like. They have actives and passives, and there's a fair amount of choice in relation to what that character can actually do, what they're themed around. But you also have a pretty cool system in the crafting idea that you will start by crafting simple things like a sword or a broken sword, just a very simple item, but you can then keep that item and turn it into progressively better things. So rather than having basic equipment in the beginning and then making or buying even better stuff later to replace it, you use the previously crafted stuff to make the better stuff instead of just replacing it entirely, which is a system that I like because it's a sort of easily followable but interesting sort of tiered system of having multiple different choices to take your developed weapons and armors down. It's like having a branching path for crafting, which is pretty cool. Right now, the game does have some problems, though. For one, in regards to this crafting system, one of the most common ingredients that you'll need are these old tools. And you need these for just about everything. You sometimes need 8 or 10 of them for a single crafted weapon or piece of armor. And you also need them for things like keys to unlock chests that you'll find, or else you'll just have to pass them up, and to make disarming kits, because you'll sometimes come across traps. Actually, you fairly often come across traps, and if you don't have a kit, then you have no choice but to activate them and take the damage and poison, whatever else they might do to you. The problem is, you might expect, because you'll, need dozens and dozens of these things, that it wouldn't be too hard to find them, but the way the drop rate is for them right now, you don't find them very often at all. In fact, I may have found about a dozen in the entire time I was playing, which wasn't enough to craft much of anything. So I think if they want to do this whole multi-tiered crafting system and having all these various things for you to make, like the keys and the trap disarmers, this, risk-reward based stuff to help you be more prepared, then the sort of linchpin ingredient to almost everything needs to be a lot more common than it currently is now, because as it stands, it's very difficult to actually make anything. And the other part of that is, currently it doesn't feel as if your characters are getting that much stronger, because there is no experience or level system in the game right now. They have said, however, that they do plan on actually adding something like that. I can't comment on anything, further than that, because of course that sort of thing tends to take a while, so you never know exactly what it's going to be like. But I'm guessing they have a few pretty good ideas about how to actually implement a leveling system. But as of right now, that isn't in the game, so it feels kind of strange to go through dozens of fights and not actually get any stronger. And because it's very difficult to find the items to actually craft anything and make your character stronger as a result, it often feels like you're just kind of, you're playing an RPG with level 1 characters that never advance no matter how many battles and areas they go through, which is kind of a strange feeling. But again, this is something that they are very much aware of, and something that they are working on actually evolving into a different final form. So we'll see how that goes. And you could say also the translation is a bit stiff, and I've said before that this isn't something that I really harp on too much, because professional translations are very expensive. It takes a while to do it either way, but if you if you don't have the rather large amount of money that something like a professional localization would take, then you instead have to rely on just kind strangers, you could say, just people that are willing to help you point out when things sound a little stiff or too literal or things like that. Just wait for your community to help you with that, and that also takes time. So, like I said, this isn't the kind of thing that I generally rag on, too hard, because it's a difficult and time-consuming and expensive thing, and right now the game is still in a place where all of the dialogue and ability descriptions and things are very easily understood, so that's fine. They just sound a little stiff here and there, and some of the dialogue is kind of silly sounding, but that's about it, really. And that kind of thing will probably be altered, changed over time as more people get aware of this project and as more people help them actually figure that kind of stuff out. So it's not going to be something that I focus on too much. Overall, I think it is a very flawed kind of RPG at the moment, just because of those issues that I mentioned, but pretty much all those issues are also things that they are currently working on, so I can't say much more about, how it will develop, because I think, personally, that it's a pretty interesting concept, because I love risk-reward heavy games, and I like these very sort of classic turn-based RPG feel that I get from this. It's a very old-school, turn-based RPG feeling, and I very much appreciate how they've made it so far. I especially really like the sprite work and all of the backgrounds for all the battles and everything. I think they look really awesome. So it's a game that I will continue to follow, because I'm curious as to how it will improve later. There is a lot of room for improvement right now in terms of the crafting system and in terms of the character progression systems, but as they already know about that, I definitely do want to actually stick around and see what they come up with, because I think it could be a pretty fun little indie gem once they get all those issues hammered out, and once the Kickstarter sort of swings into full motion, hopefully, and they release the game as a 1.0. So this has been Sinslayers. Thank you guys very, very much for watching, and keep an eye on the project if it interests you as well. I'll see you guys next time.